Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for Monday. Today is June the 13th, and today we are reading together in Ezekiel chapter 41 and also in Mark chapter 8. Ezekiel 41 and Mark chapter 8. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope that you have recovered well from our long day yesterday, but a great day of kicking off our special series of studies with Jason Shackelford. A lot of y'all have been able to rekindle that past friendship. It's been awesome to see, and it's been great to spend some time with Jason myself, or to spend some time with Jason myself, and to have him and his family over to the house last night. Great folks. Appreciate so much his preaching and his teaching and his work for the Lord, and we're looking forward to enjoying that throughout this week, 7 p.m. Each night, Monday through Friday, as he talks about diligent discipleship. But to go ahead and give us a bit of an appetizer on some Bible focus for today, we're going to read together in Ezekiel chapter 41 and Mark chapter 8. So let me go ahead and get Ezekiel 41 up on the screen. And again, as we're looking in this section, talking about the vision of the new temple, we are left with the question of whether or not we are to take this literally or figuratively, to recognize this as a literal new temple that is going to be built, or to understand this as being symbolic in nature. Is it literal? Is it figurative? Is it literal? Is it symbolic? Is it something that is to be built, or something that is being built? And those questions are things that we need to consider. Again, I said in our reading yesterday, I'll say it again, I take this much more symbolically. A few reasons for that is that there are no commands to build here in this text. This is not a blueprint that has been given. This is something that Ezekiel is currently seeing. He's seeing this taking place. He's seeing this being built. Secondly, it's never referred to as Jerusalem. It's simply referred to as this structure that looks like a building, a temple, and just the dimensions. There are very few height dimensions that are given throughout this description. And if that's the case, then how are they going to know how high to build it? And some of the other aspects of it just don't quite meet the criteria of what we've seen previously in regard to the tabernacle and the first temple that was built. Now, the reality is that they are going to come back. The Jews are going to come back to Jerusalem, and they are going to build a temple. But as far as I know, this wasn't the temple that they built. I could be wrong about that, but that seems to be the case. So just for me, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about this being something that is much more symbolic in nature, something that is going to be created not through the hands of men, but through the hands of the Messiah. So that being the case, let's just read here together in Ezekiel 41, and then we'll hop on over to Mark chapter 8. Ezekiel 41 and verse 1. Next, he brought me to the great hall and measured the jambs. On each side, the width of the jamb was 10.5 feet. The width of the entrance was 17.5 feet. And the side walls of the entrance were 8 3/4 feet, 3/4 feet wide on each side. He also measured the length of the great hall, 70 feet, and the width, 35 feet. He went inside the next room and measured the jambs at the entrance. They were 3.5 feet wide. The entrance was 10.5 feet wide, and the width of the entrance's side walls on each side was 12 1/4 feet. He then measured the length of the room adjacent to the great hall, 35 feet, and the width, 35 feet. And he said to me, "This is the most holy place." Then he measured the wall of the temple. It was 10.5 feet thick. The width of the side rooms all around the temple was 7 feet. The side rooms were ranged one above another in 3 stories of 30 rooms each. There were ledges on the wall of the temple and all around to serve as supports for the side rooms, so that the supports would not be in the temple wall itself. The side rooms surrounding the temple widened at each successive story, for the structure surrounding the temple went up by stages. And this was the reason for the temple's broadness as it rose. And so one would go up from the lowest story to the highest by means of the middle one. Verse number 8, I saw the temple had a raised platform surrounding it. This foundation for the side rooms was 10.5 feet high. The thickness of the outer wall of the side rooms was 8 3/4 feet. The free space between the side rooms of the temple and the outer chambers was 35 feet tall all around the temple. The side rooms opened into the free space, one entrance toward the north, another to the south. The area of the free space was 8.75 feet wide all around. Now, the building that faced the temple yard toward the west was 122 feet wide. The wall of the building was 8.75 feet thick on all sides, and the building's length was 157 feet, 157 and a half feet. And then the man measured the temple. It was 75 feet long. In addition, the temple yard and the temple building, including the walls, was 175 feet long. The width of the front of the temple along the temple yard was, or to the east, was 175 feet. And next he measured the length of the building facing the temple yard to the west with its galleries on each side. It was 175 feet. The interior of the great hall and the porticos of the court, the thresholds, the beveled windows, the balconies all around with their 3 levels opposite threshold were overlaid with wood on all sides. They were paneled from the ground to the windows, but the windows were covered, reaching to the top of the temple, to the top of the entrance, and as far as the inner temple on the outside. On every wall, all around, on the inside and outside, was a pattern carved with cherubim and palm trees. There was a palm tree between each pair of cherubim. Each cherubim had 2 faces, a human face turned toward the palm tree on one side, a lion's face turned toward it on the other. They were carved throughout the temple on all sides. Cherubim and palm trees were carved from the ground to the top of the entrance and on the wall of the great hall. The doorposts of the great hall were square, and the front of the sanctuary had the same appearance. The altar was made of wood, 5.25 feet high and 3.5 feet long. It had corners, and its length and sides were of wood. The man told me, "This is the table that stands before the Lord." The great hall and the sanctuary each had a double door, and each of the doors had 2 swinging panels. There were 2 panels on one door and 2 for the other. The cherubim and the palm trees were carved into the doors of the great hall, like those carved on the walls. There was a wooden canopy outside in front of the portico. There were beveled windows and palm trees on both sides. On the side walls of the portico, the side rooms of the temple, and the canopies. Ezekiel chapter 41. Now, this vision of the temple that Ezekiel is seeing will be finished up in chapter 42. And after that, there's going to be more detail going through chapter 46 concerning this vision of the new temple. And once we get past that to chapter 47, we're going to see some more details, and then some seemingly a little weird, not maybe obscure to us, the tribal reallotments being dispersed in chapter 48. So we'll continue reading here in chapter 42 tomorrow of Ezekiel. All right, let's go and hop over to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8 and verse number 1. We're going to have another feeding of a large crowd by Jesus, and we're going to see some lessons that he tries to get his disciples to understand as he goes throughout this text. Mark chapter 8 and verse number 1. In those days, there was again a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat. He, being Jesus, called the disciples and said to them, "I have compassion on the crowd, because they've already stayed with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, and some of them have come a long distance." His disciples answered him, "Where can anyone get enough bread here in this desolate place to feed these people?" "Well, how many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked them. 7, they said. And then Jesus commanded the crowd to sit down on the ground. Taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. So they served them to the crowd. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he said these were to be served as well. They ate and were satisfied. And then they collected 7 large baskets of leftover pieces. Excuse me, about 4,000 were there. He dismissed them And he immediately got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmatia or Damantha. The Pharisees, verse number 11, came and began to argue with him, demanding of him being Jesus, a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and went to the other side. The disciples had forgotten to take bread and had only one loaf with them in the boat. Then he gave them strict orders. "Watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." They were discussing among themselves that they did not have any bread. Being aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Don't you understand or comprehend? Do you have hardened hearts? Do you have eyes that do not see? Do you have ears and not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of leftovers did you collect? 12. They told him. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets of pieces did you collect? 7, they said. And he said to them, "Don't you understand yet?" Verse 22, they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and brought him out of the village. Spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like walking trees." Again, Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes. The man looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Jesus went out with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They answered him, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets. But you," Jesus asked them, "who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he strictly warned them to tell no one about him. Then he began to teach them that it was necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things, to be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, to be killed, and rise after 3 days. He spoke openly about this. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns." Calling the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit, or what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet lose his life? What can anyone give in exchange for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." And then I want to add on verse number 1 of chapter 9 as well, because I think it fits best in this reading. Then he said to them, so in the same breath, in the same conversation, that he said to them, "Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come in power." Mark chapter 8 and also chapter 9 and verse number 1. Well, within this text, obviously, we see the do we call the progression, maybe the lack of the progression of even the apostles concerning their understanding of Jesus. And I think this text is really exemplified in the healing of the blind man in verse 22, because it's very strange. People might wonder, well, Jesus, he wasn't able to heal this man completely the first time. He didn't have the power to do it. So he had to go back and do it again. But instead, I would say that Jesus was doing this for a purpose, and it was for the purpose of illustrating the reality of the disciples and their understanding, how they were seeing and perceiving who Jesus was. Because they're going to say, it's directly after this section, directly after this, that they have they have Peter's confession concerning Jesus, that he is the Messiah. So they can, in a sense, see that. But as soon as Jesus turns around and starts explaining to them what that means for him to be to be the Messiah, we see that they don't get it. Peter, being the one who most often represents the thoughts of the group as a whole, he says, "No, Lord, you're not going to die. That's not going to happen to you. That's just not a thing." And yet, what does Jesus do? He says, "You're not thinking how God is wanting you to think. You're thinking how the enemy, the evil one, wants you to think." And that's really how it was going for them, that they had somewhat of an understanding of what it was, what it meant for Jesus to be who they claimed for him to be. But the reality is they didn't see that picture clearly. And it was going to be a process, just as with this blind man, how he didn't see it all. Excuse me, he didn't see it all. And then he saw the figures of people in a blurry way. And then he saw clearly. And for the disciples, it was the same way. They didn't understand Jesus at all as the Messiah. And then it was acknowledged that he was, yet they didn't get what it meant for him to be the Messiah. But they're going to get it eventually. And that just shows the progress of faith and understanding of Jesus. And the reality is that we all go through that same process as well, that there is progression in our faith. That the more we come to know, the more we can understand, the more faith and greater belief we can have in Jesus. So maybe you're at a place right now where you feel like, I just don't have the understanding. I don't have the knowledge that these other individuals have. And that might be very frustrating to you. I get it. I understand that. But don't give up. Keep digging. Keep studying. Keep reading. Keep making connections. Keep connecting the dots. And allow for that image that you have of Jesus in your mind, the way you understand him, the way you perceive him. And the reality is the way we understand Jesus, the way we perceive Jesus, it should have an impact on who we are and the way we behave. So the more we can add color and can add depth to who we understand Jesus to be, and to understand what he expects of us, then we can be like those who are more mature in the faith. That's what I really see here in Mark chapter 8, is that this is a progression. Faith is a progression. We're growing. We want to give even more effort in following Jesus, to deny ourselves even more, and to be even more willing to take up that cross and be willing to follow Jesus even further than maybe we've done before. So wherever you are in that journey of faith and in that process, keep pressing on. Keep pressing on. Don't give up. Don't quit. Keep following, and never stop. Mark chapter 8 and verse number 1 of chapter 9. Thanks so much for tuning into this daily Bible reading. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the comment section, either on Facebook or YouTube. And we hope that you can join in again tomorrow as we continue reading on Tuesday. Tomorrow is going to be June the 14th, and we're going to be reading in Ezekiel 42 and also Mark chapter 9. Hope you could join for that. And if you're in the Loudoun area, we'd love for you to come join us for our Bible study tonight, as Jason Shackelford leads us in a study of God's word, talking about how the disciples of Jesus must be religiously narrow-minded. And we think, well, that sounds abrasive to say that. But if we recognize there is such a thing as truth, then we are restricted and we are bound to stay within the realms of truth of Scripture concerning how we ought to carry ourselves as disciples of Jesus. Again, we are to follow him wherever he would lead us, which means we need to stay on that path that he dictates. We'd love for you to join us as we study along in that, or if you need to catch us online, that will be streamed live on Facebook and YouTube as well. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. God bless you. We look forward to reading with you again tomorrow on Tuesday, June the 14th. See you then. Take care, and God bless.